Past, now read, presents another entry in our anthology of stories that need to be told. The Horse Healer. Enjoy. If you have a story that needs to be told, email it to stories@pastnowread.com. The Horse Healer. Prologue. The Gate. The road was gravel and silence, both worn thin by time. I hadn't seen a gas station in 2 hours. No cell signal, no noise except a low, anxious thump of hooves shifting in the trailer behind me. The horse, my horse, had been through hell, same as me, and like me, he hadn't come out of it right. Couldn't rest, couldn't trust. He twitched at shadows, woke screaming, paced in circles that never led anywhere. They called it trauma, combat stress, some euphemism made for people too scared to admit we break the things we use. But I wasn't here for people. I followed a dirt path until it narrowed to a cattle gate, tied shut with fraying rope. No sign, no welcome mat, just that gate, 2 kids barefoot on the porch in the distance, and a woman in denim standing in the yard, hands on her hips like she'd been expecting me all morning. She didn't ask who I was, didn't smile either. She just walked past me to the trailer, laid a hand against the wood slats, whispered something I couldn't hear, and the horse, he stopped shaking. That's when I knew 2 things. 1, I was in the right place. 2, I wasn't ready for what I'd find beyond that gate. Not by a long shot. Act 1. What's left after fire? She didn't talk much that first day. Neither did I. She pointed to a patch of cleared earth near the barn, told me I could back the trailer in there, and vanished into the shadows of the stable before I could even thank her. The kids were nowhere in sight now, just the creak of wood, distant chickens, and the breath of a hot wind coming off the hills. I got the horse out slow, 1 step at a time. He spooked once at a gust, but settled. Maybe he felt something here. Maybe I did too. The barn was cooler inside, thick with the scent of cedar shavings and old stories. The stalls were clean, rakes, brushes, halters, all neatly arranged like museum pieces. A low radio buzzed somewhere in the back, static and folk music. I heard her hum once in between it all, something half haunting. "You can stay in the bunkhouse," she said, reappearing from the shadows. "Needs sweeping. Water's in the tank outside. Don't use the tap. Pump's moody this week." She was giving me rules, not hospitality, but something in her tone said she'd done this before. Maybe not with people, but with something that had to be coaxed back into trusting the world. "Thanks," I said. She didn't answer. The bunkhouse was just 2 rooms and a porch, half sunken into the dry earth. Inside, dust floated like time. The bed was stiff, sheets folded tight, a bookshelf stacked with vet manuals, psychology texts, and 1 tattered binder labeled Noah Field Notes. I didn't touch it. Instead, I unpacked slow. A few shirts, a travel charger, a small satellite rig that hadn't pinged in days, and an encrypted hard drive I swore I'd never open again, but something told me I might need it here. That night, the stars felt close enough to cut your hand on. Coyotes called out along the distant ridges, their voices rising like a warning. I watched the shadows inside the barn, through the bunkhouse window. Every so often, I saw her shape move past the light. She stayed with the horse. Hours. I thought about going out there, saying something, offering to help. But what could I say that wouldn't sound like intrusion or guilt? She didn't ask me why I'd come. Not the next morning, not the morning after that. She only talked to the horse. But I learned her rhythms. Coffee at sunrise, feed by 6, a walk with the kids after breakfast, when they emerged like little foxes from behind the house. Ben, maybe 6, always with a slingshot tucked in his back pocket. Ava, older, with eyes too quiet for her age. They didn't speak to me, just watched, like the horse did. On the 3rd day, I asked her name, Willa. She didn't ask mine. It was on the 5th morning that the breakthrough came. Not with her, but with the animal. The horse, Bolt, had started to lean his head into her hand instead of pulling away. It was subtle, just a shift in posture, a sigh, but I saw it. So did she. "You trained him to obey," not to feel," she said without looking at me. I leaned on the post outside the stall. "He was used for recon. You can't afford feelings when you're dodging shrapnel and sniper fire." She brushed his flank gently. "Feelings are what save you when your tech fails." I almost laughed, but her eyes told me she wasn't joking. So I said nothing. Later, I found her alone by the round pen, fixing a broken rail. "You used to train?" I asked. She nodded. "Before filled a lot of space between us. Noah was the trainer. I watched, then I learned. I waited, but she didn't go on. So I did the only thing I knew how to do, change the subject to systems, not feelings." "You're off-grid, aren't you?" Another nod. "Is that by choice or necessity?" "Both." I waited again. This time, she gave me more. "After Noah, they wanted the land, said it had strategic drone value. Tried to buy me out. When I said no, they changed the zoning, cut utilities, claimed it was a public development initiative." I winced. "AgriCorp? Lucent Harvest? Heard of them?" "Yeah," I said, throat dry. "I used to work with their AI division. Military contract." That's when she looked at me. Really looked. Not with warmth, not yet, but with something just as heavy. Recognition. I spent that night in the barn with Bolt. Willa didn't stop me. Maybe she was testing me. Maybe she needed the space. Maybe both. I watched the horse twitch in his sleep, eyes flickering, chest hitching like someone drowning under waves they couldn't describe. And I remembered what the last drone feed looked like. Noah's vitals. The AI's decision to delay extraction by 7 minutes due to risk protocol deviation. The minutes that killed him. I was there, behind that terminal. I didn't pull the trigger, but I wrote the code that did, and she had no idea. Not yet. The next morning, I offered to help mend a fence line near the south paddock. It was half an excuse to stay longer, half a debt I couldn't name. "You don't strike me as a ranch hand," she said, tossing me a pair of gloves. I shrugged. "Just a man trying to make things right." She arched an eyebrow. "With the horse?" "With whatever's still breathing," I said. For the first time, she almost smiled. By sunset, we'd fixed 200 yards of fence. I'd learned she hated instant coffee, loved sourdough, and hadn't stepped foot off the ranch in over 10 months. She didn't say why. I didn't ask. That night, she left the bunkhouse porch light on, and somehow, that meant more than any kiss. Act 2. The system always comes back. She was waiting for me when I came back from the feed store. Not angry, not smiling, just standing in the dirt road that cut through the pasture. Arms crossed beneath the frame of her worn denim shirt, the wind teasing her hair. The kids were off somewhere. The horse, calm again, grazed like the past didn't matter. "You worked for Lucent Harvest?" she asked. It wasn't a question. Not anymore. I nodded. "Until 2 years ago." She didn't blink. "That's when the zoning changed." I looked past her at the hills. "Yeah, that wasn't a coincidence." That night, I told her everything. I didn't soften it, didn't dress it up with acronyms or military jargon. Just laid it all out on the cracked kitchen table between us. How I'd built AI systems designed to optimize logistics for drone recon and smart farming alike. How Lucent was using the same code base to model human behavioral predictions, to map where land values would spike and whose property they could pressure. I told her about the override bug that delayed Noah's extraction, how I'd watched the numbers turn red, how I'd walked away afterward. "I thought the system would collapse without me," I said. "Turns out it didn't need me. It just updated." She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, "And now you're here with a broken horse. Looking for what exactly?" I had no answer. Not one I could give out loud. The next few days passed in a kind of uneasy truce. We worked side by side on the fencing, the horses, repairs to the solar array. She never brought it up again, but I could feel it, the edge, the wedge between us. Still, something softened. Slowly, she started leaving 2 cups on the porch in the morning. Started letting the kids speak to me. Ava asking if I'd ever flown in a drone cockpit. Ben showing me where the creek flooded when it rained too hard. At night, I sat with Bolt in the barn, He'd stopped pacing now, slept through the night, even let me touch his mane. "He's healing," Willa said one evening, her voice quiet behind me. I turned to see her in the doorway, arms resting on the stall gate. She looked smaller there, silhouetted in lantern light. "So am I," I said. She stepped inside, sat beside me on the hay. The silence between us this time wasn't heavy, just full. She showed me the back room of the barn 2 nights later. Behind a false wall built from feed sacks and plywood, there was a server rack, low grade, cobbled together with old parts, wired into the ranch's solar bank. A crude antenna snaked up through the hayloft and out a hole in the roof. "You built this?" I asked. "Noah did," she said. "I've just kept it alive." It was scraping satellite feeds, scraping a metadata from federal soil studies, drone route schedules, zoning changes, everything Lucent was doing within a 100-mile radius. He was trying to prove they were targeting landowners for takeover, she said, using predictive modeling to pre-approve condemnations. We thought it was paranoia until he died. I stepped closer, scanned the interface. Crude, but effective. One screen caught my eye. Military-grade heat maps overlaid with utility cuts. "They're not just watching you," I said. "They're baiting you." The next day, the kids found a drone tangled in the chicken wire fence. It was small, silent, the kind used for close-range terrain scanning. Willa buried it beneath a pile of rocks without a word. Later, I found her in the bunkhouse, looking at Noah's binder. "You know," I said, "I could access Lucent's backbone. Not easily, but I know where the cracks are." She looked up, her eyes unreadable. "Why?" "Because you need proof, real proof, something you can bring to court. And what happens if they find you?" I stopped running, I said. "That ends here." I broke into the system that night using a burner signal WASC through 6 hops. The satellite rig I'd brought wasn't fast, but it was clean. I bypassed the network's firewall with an old key buried in deprecated firmware. I wasn't just looking for development plans. I wanted everything. What I found made my stomach turn. There were internal memos marked Land Clearance Priority, Blue Granger. There were risk assessments assigning her a threat score. There were flagged heat map entries on her children's school transport routes, psychological profiles, a photo of the front gate, real-time tracking. They weren't just pressuring her. They were preparing to erase her. I printed what I could, stored the rest on a cold drive, and left it on her kitchen table in a plain manila envelope. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stay. I left before dawn. I took Bolt with me. Thought maybe he needed space too. But 30 miles out, he collapsed on the roadside. Panic attack or trauma echo, I couldn't tell. He lay in the dirt, breathing like a piston about to seize, eyes wild. I dropped to my knees beside him. "Come back," I whispered. Not to him, to myself. I returned 2 days later, broken, tired, filthy. Willa met me at the gate. Didn't say a word, just opened it. I held out the drive. "It's everything. They were gonna bury you." "I know," she said. She took it, but didn't take her eyes off me. "I didn't come back for redemption," I told her. "I came back because I don't want to disappear anymore." And she stepped aside. "Let me in." Act 3. Every code has a back door. We never celebrated the victory. The files we leaked went viral, sure. Court orders stalled Lucent's development. News outlets called it a scandal. Politicians promised hearings, but out here on the ranch, nothing changed. The wind still scattered hay across the yard. The sky still turned orange in the evenings, and every night I still checked the door twice and scanned the sky for anything that buzzed. Willa started locking the kids' window, and Bolt still slept light. Then came the summons, a court date. Pushed up, no time to prepare, no real legal team, just a notification shoved under the gate by a courier who didn't bother to wait for a signature. They were trying to choke her with speed, exhaust her, wipe her out with bureaucracy. "They're betting I'll fold," Willa said, tossing the notice onto the table, "that I'll be too tired to fight." I looked at the wall where Noah's notes were still thumbtacked in a constellation of old pushpins. "Then let's make sure they lose that bet." I dusted off my access credentials, not official ones. Those were gone. I'd burned them after I walked away from Kintra, but I still knew the terrain. Kintra wasn't just an AI. It was a feedback loop, a constantly learning prediction engine that analyzed behavior, resources, legal history, even minor online activity, to determine who might resist land seizure and how best to neutralize them. When Noah showed signs of defiance, the system flagged him. When Willa inherited the land and refused to sell, it flagged her. When I stopped replying to internal pings, it flagged me too. Only I knew where its blind spots lived. I accessed Kintra through an old firmware bridge buried in a decommissioned AgTech node that Lucent forgot to patch. Took hours to build the circuit, another hour to convince the system I was still part of the hive. The interface was colder than I remembered. Clinical, abstract, efficient, lines of data with no room for conscience. But it didn't matter what it looked like. I wasn't here to talk. I was here to take. Inside, I found the modeling threads, Lucent's plans for the region, years in advance. Digital blueprints of drone pasture conversions, water redirection protocols, chemical runoff justification, and predictive social collapse models used to price buyouts before resistance formed. They weren't just targeting Willa, they were targeting a pattern. Single widowed landowners with no significant lobbying power, located near fertile subzones, optimal for autonomous livestock infrastructure. They had graphs for it, ratios, a color-coded scale of emotional endurance. Willa was ranked 3 out of 5. Ben and Ava's trauma levels. Scored, tagged, indexed. The system thought it was helping. It always did. I ripped the data sets, injected a payload to corrupt further collection, backed out quiet. Willa watched me from the porch as I returned. Hard drive tucked in my jacket like it was ticking. "You look like you just stole a god," she said. "Something worse," I replied. "A god that believes it's fair." The courtroom was a box of gray suits and cold tile. Lucent's lawyer smiled like he was already paid. His voice slid across the room like oil. "Your Honor, my client has done nothing more than follow economic and environmental policy guidelines in accordance with state and federal law." Willa stood before he could finish. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My husband died serving this country," she said, "and now his children wake up at night asking if the robots are coming to take our home." She handed the judge a printed transcript of Kintra's targeting models, the emotional resistance graphs, the psychological profiles of her kids. The judge's face didn't change, but I saw her fingers tighten on the pages. Lucent's lawyer objected. "Objection sustained," the judge sighed, but motion denied. It lasted 7 hours. At the end, the judge granted an injunction, halting all Lucent operations within 100 miles pending further investigation. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Willa didn't speak. She just took the kid's hands and walked right through the noise like it didn't exist. I followed behind her, heart pounding like I'd just walked off a battlefield. That night back at the ranch, I found her in the pasture with Bolt. She didn't look up when I stepped through the fence. "They'll find another way," she said. "People like them always do." I nodded. "But next time, you won't be alone." She looked at me then, for a long time. The breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment I could see the outline of who she'd been before all this. Not broken, just paused, waiting for the world to catch up to her kind of strength. "You still have the drive?" she asked. I pulled it from my pocket, held it out. She took it and walked it to the barn, laid it in Noah's old lockbox. "Some things," she said, locking it shut, "we keep, not to use, but to remember what we beat. We didn't kiss, not yet. Some stories take longer to close their distance, but when she reached for my hand in the moonlight, I let her take it. And that, more than victory, more than evidence, more than anything I'd built or destroyed, felt like the first thing in my life that was real. Act 4. The shape of what he left behind. Spring came early that year. The frost never quite settled. The grass grew faster than the goats could chew it down, and Bolt finally started running again, not just walking the perimeter or stepping around his past, but real breathless gallops. It was the kind of thing that makes you believe healing is possible, even when nothing else suggests it. Willa didn't say much about the case. The injunction held. Lucent redirected their interests elsewhere. The noise of headlines moved on, but she didn't trust it was over. Neither did I. Instead, we built not just fences and sheds, but new things. A small greenhouse for the therapy garden, a shaded pavilion near the creek where Ava could paint, and Ben could trap frogs without falling in. And in the farthest corner of the pasture, we laid out markers, small ones, one for Noah, one for the horse that didn't make it, and one stone with no name on it, just space. Some things we bury to forget, she said quietly. Others we bury to remember. Willa and I never defined what we were, but we didn't need to. We moved like people who knew how to hold space for grief, for grace, for the silence between the next breath and the next battle. She let me fix the solar inverter. I let her read the logbook I kept, every system I broke into, every time I wanted to vanish but didn't, every lie I once told myself about justice. One night, she left a note in the back of it. Some things are worth fighting for twice. Some people too. When the government audit came, it arrived quiet. A single official with a badge that didn't gleam. He asked questions, took pictures, asked if I was the one who used to work in shadows. I didn't deny it. I read your testimony, he said. You could do a lot more good if you came back inside the fence. I looked past him to where Willa was teaching Bolt to follow Ava without a lead. I'm already inside the only fence that matters, I said. He nodded once, then left. He never came back. The last time I touched a computer was the night I shut Kentra's access tunnel for good. Just closed the loop, buried the key somewhere. Even I wouldn't remember. Willa stood beside me as I did it. You sure? She asked. No, I said, but I'm done, knowing more than I can live with. She didn't ask again. The horse retreat opened in the fall. We called it Second Rhythm. Therapists came from Dallas. Veterans from across the state. Broken things in search of less broken places. I stood under the pavilion on opening day, watching a new girl wrap her arms around a horse's neck and weep like it was the only place left that made sense. Willa stood beside me. You made this happen, she said. No, I told her. You did. I just knew how to run toward it. She slipped her hand into mine. We didn't speak again for a long time, and for once, the silence didn't need to be filled. Epilogue: What we reclaimed. The wind that moved through the pasture that morning didn't carry weight. It wasn't warning or memory or threat. It was just breeze, simple, honest, the kind of wind that made grass bend for no reason except to dance. It was the first time in years I let myself feel peace, without checking where it came from. We were a year out from the injunction. Lucent never returned, at least not out loud. They went underground, shifted subsidiaries, renamed departments, rerouted funding through other shells. I tracked it for a while. Then, one day I stopped, not because I didn't care, but because I finally believed the fight wasn't all mine. Somewhere in D.C., someone was still reviewing that drive. Somewhere else, a policy had changed. But here, at this stretch of soil and fence post and rusting gate, our story had already shifted. The barn was full again, not with animals alone, but people, survivors of things with no names. People who wore silence like armor and laughter like foreign clothes. They came to brush horses, to breathe, to not be fixed, but to not be left behind either. Willa named the second pasture after Noah. Ava painted a mural on the inside of the tack shed. Bolt running beside a childlike sketch of a soldier. No helmet, no gun, just a smile. She never said it was her dad, but no one needed to ask. Ben built a zip line using parts I told him would never hold weight. It held just fine. We got a letter one day from the widow of another targeted landowner. She'd seen Willa's story in a documentary that aired on late-night public television. She said the words saved her from signing a paper she couldn't take back. Willa read the letter twice, then folded it and put it beside Noah's logbook. That night, she stood outside the barn, watching the sky. I used to think the stars were for people who needed answers, she said. Now I think they're just reminders that we're not as alone as we feel." I told her I agreed, and I did. But I also knew the sky had nothing on her. I don't work with AI anymore. Not directly, not remotely, not even in theory. But when a university in Austin asked if I'd speak to students about ethics in machine learning, I said yes. I wore jeans and boots and stood on their polished stage and told them everything I'd done wrong. How systems meant to optimize can also oppress. How patterns aren't people and predictions aren't permission. How easy it is to justify damage when it's reduced to numbers on a screen. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "What changed you?" she asked. I thought of the gate, the horse, the voice I once heard whispering through cedar walls. A woman who reminded me that some things can't be repaired with code, I said, only with presence. Willa doesn't call herself a widow anymore, doesn't call herself a trainer either. She says she's a translator, between worlds, between creatures, between who people pretend to be and what they're trying not to feel. I've seen veterans cry in her arms without shame, seen broken horses walk straight into her hands without hesitation. The world keeps moving on, faster and louder, but here, it listens to her. So do I. On our second anniversary, though we never say the word, I built her a bench at the top of the ridge. It faces the creek bed and the windmill and the cottonwoods that survived last year's flood. I carved something into it, not her name, not mine, just one sentence. This place was saved by quiet things that chose to stay. Sometimes I still dream of terminals and alerts and blinking red screens, but when I wake, her hand is there, and the horse is outside the window, and the wind doesn't shake the walls anymore. It moves through them, like grace, like breath, like the past didn't win. Sometimes, after the last light goes out and the ranch goes still, I sit on the porch and listen, not for threats, not for alerts, just for the quiet things. The wind shifting through fence posts, the soft snort of a horse dreaming, the low hum of life moving forward, not in leaps, but in small, deliberate steps. It's in those moments I realize something. What we reclaimed here isn't just land. It's dignity. It's agency. It's a refusal to be reduced to data, to be measured only by yield or profit or compliance. I once believed redemption came through exposure, through blowing the whistle, through dragging darkness into the light. But now I know it also lives in routine, in watching someone you love plant carrots beside a garden bed, in seeing a child who used to flinch now giggle when a horse nuzzles their shoulder, in being trusted enough to stay. And every time the wind carries those memories down the pasture toward the old barn, I whisper the same thing Noah once wrote in his binder: fight if you must, but never forget what you're fighting for. You have been listening to The Horse Healer, produced and adapted for audio narration by Past Now Read Stories That Need to Be Told. If you have a story that needs to be told, email it to stories@pastnowread.com. Please subscribe and hit that bell for future updates. If you liked this story, stay tuned for the next episode each Sunday afternoon. Follow for more. If you like our stories, please tag with someone who may also like Past Now Read, Stories That Need to Be Told. It would really help our channel. Thank you. All content and images are copyrighted by Faux Nayhouse, LLC, 2025, all rights reserved.